Welcome back to Close Up, and let's return to our parade of convention interviews, starting with Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Buttigieg, if someone had told you, hey, the Democrats are going to have to change out their nominee in July, right before the convention, most people would say, that's nuts, it's not going to work out. But here the party is, and it seems to be doing okay so far. Would you recommend this every cycle?
You know, certainly an unusual year and an unusual moment. It's not often you see an American president choose to lay aside power just because it's the right thing to do. What happened next is even more remarkable. Look, the Democratic Party is not always known for quickly coming to agreement, and yet in a matter of hours, Kamala Harris really coalesced the party around her. I think because we have a shared vision, a shared vision of freedom, that includes a woman's freedom to choose, that means the economic freedoms that the Democratic Party stands for, and a vision of leadership and what it's going to be like to live in a country under her leadership compared to going back to the chaos that we experienced 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago. I just don't think most Americans want to go back to that. And I think that's part of what's propelled the amazing energy of the last month.
Why do you think former President Trump is struggling so mightily to figure out how to run against Kamala Harris?
Well, I think he has a very hard time figuring out what to do with a campaign that is not all about the candidates, but is actually more about the people. And that's one of the big themes you're going to see across the convention this week. And so what you're seeing him doing is whatever's the most outrageous thing he can do to get attention, insulting everything from black journalists to war heroes who received the Congressional Medal of Honor. It's not a normal strategy for a politician, but it could be a strategy designed to not have to talk about his unpopular policies. You can tell that they're scrambling. You can tell that they're off balance. But look, the vice president has been clear that she still very much views this as an underdog effort. We know the headwinds that we're up against. We're going to have to work for every inch of ground and earn every vote.
You mentioned Project 2025 in your speech here. Do you think that's going to connect for voters on policy? Very important, but do you think that the average voter is going to be able to connect with a policy handbook, which many people find controversial?
Look, I don't think most voters are paging through the 950 pages of Project 2025, but I think they are hearing about the policy ideas, like more tax cuts for the rich, things that are going to increase inflation, going even further down the road of eliminating freedoms like going after birth control, potentially dismantling marriage equality and what makes it possible for a family like mine to exist, eliminating the Department of Education, just one extreme policy after another. That's already the road that they were on during the first Trump administration, but would be, I think, that much more radical during a second.
And wrapping up here, Mr. Buttigieg, how do you think New Hampshire Democrats handled the situation with the primary? Obviously, you were a big participant in 2020. It was a different primary in 2024. How do you think that was handled by New Hampshire Democrats?
Well, I think New Hampshire Democrats did a remarkable job under very complicated and challenging circumstances of demonstrating their strength as Democrats, their belief in the future of this party. And I think that earned an enormous amount of goodwill among leaders in the Democratic Party nationally.
What about the primary's future? What do you think?
I know every few years this comes up. It's beyond me to know all of the different things that may happen in the years to come. But what I do know is that what I learned on the ground in New Hampshire, one community at a time, is the importance of the politics of reaching out, not through television only, not through the internet only, but in looking people in the eye, listening to them one at a time. And I hope that is a style of politics that continues to be a huge part of how we select our leaders in this country.
The first in the nation New Hampshire primary gained a staunch ally over the last couple of years in Congressman Ro Khanna. He's from California, but he has Rust Belt swing state roots. Congressman Khanna, you represent California, you're from Pennsylvania. What is it going to take for either one of these campaigns to win that Keystone State?
We've got to be everywhere in that state, not just go to Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but go to places like Johnstown, Pennsylvania, go to places like Farrell, go up to Lackawanna in northeast Pennsylvania. If you talk to Senator Fetterman, if you talk to Governor Shapiro, they will tell you being present, active in every county and community is key to that state.
You're a policy guy. What do you think about Vice President Harris's proposal on price controls on groceries? Some Republican critics are calling this communism.
Well, it's not communism, and it's not price controls. I think what Vice President Harris said is that she wants to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of the concentration of power. And what I would focus on is going after the antitrust violations. You don't want big conglomerates colluding. But the real cause of inflation is that it's hurting people's ability to buy things. And we should emphasize child care policy. We should emphasize increasing Social Security Security, put more money in people's pockets, the child tax credit, and making more things in America to bring down costs.
You know, we talk about policy, we talk about these states like Pennsylvania that used to have a huge manufacturing base and lost it. How important is it for the next administration to deliver on the promises that it's making on the campaign trail?
It's absolutely key. I was just in Pennsylvania introducing a modern steel bill. I said, why can't we build modern steel plants in America with the next generation of steel that's also going to be decarbonized? Imagine if you had new steel plants coming up in Pennsylvania, Ohio, downriver Michigan. Or imagine in North Country in New Hampshire. I was up there and they said, why can't we take the timber that is there and instead of exporting it out in New Hampshire, do the lamentation to use it as a substitute for concrete? The Democratic Party needs to fund those kind of initiatives in advanced manufacturing to reindustrialize parts of the country that have been lost. It won't be the same everywhere. It may be steel mills in Johnstown, and maybe timber up in North Country, but we've got to have a plan, which we haven't had for so many years, and we need to deliver.
You were arguably the only national figure in the Democratic Party outside of New Hampshire who stood with New Hampshire every step of the way through that difficult primary process. Do you think the first in the nation primary state did enough to officially have the primary back through the DNC in the next cycle?
I do, and I give the credit to the New Hampshire delegation. I give it to the extraordinary grace that New Hampshire showed in having the write-in campaign for President Biden. But anyone who comes to New Hampshire will know one thing, that you're judged not by your bank account, you're judged not by your celebrity, you're judged not by the amount of Twitter followers you have, you're not judged based on a television appearance, you're judged based on your substance, you're judged based on your ideas. And anyone has a shot to get those ideas across. And that's what I love about this state. It elevates ideas in the national conversation. Most people who run for president lose, but their best ideas emerge. And that's such a vibrant tradition in this country. Why would we want to give it up?
These conventions are also known for launching state and local officials into more national prominent roles. One Democrat we're told to watch in the years ahead is Maryland Governor Wes Moore. Governor, as a rising star in the Democratic Party, what was it like to make that floor speech in front of 25,000 Democrats?
It was so great because the energy is so real. And the great thing is that this is not just about the energy you feel inside the center. These are all folks who are going back homes, to their communities, to their neighborhoods. And you can see how this energy is just going to continue and increase as we're getting closer to Election Day. So we're feeling very good and very confident.
You're a combat veteran of the global war on terror. What is it going to take for Democrats to reverse the trend among active duty and veterans of not getting as many of those voters as they used to?
Well, I think we need to go after them. And I think the idea that somehow we should be ceding this mantle of patriotism or love of country is crazy. I mean, I love my country deeply. I fought for my country. I will fight for my country until my last breath. And some of the greatest patriots that I have met have been people whose stories and origins might not have even started from this country, but they believe in the future of this country and they fought for it. And so I think it just becomes incredibly important that we go out there and earn every single vote, and that includes our veterans families, because the policies that we are pushing forward are ones that are best supporting them.
Senator Maggie Hassan has a special relationship with Vice President Harris. The connection, she tells us, based on a kind of Senate sisterhood. Senator Hassan, you came into the Senate alongside Kamala Harris in 2016. What's that connection like? You say there's a sisterhood there.
Yeah, there's a group of us who came into the Senate together, tried to learn the ropes of the Senate together, and it's a really strong bond. And as I talked about this morning, Vice President Harris is a really wonderful friend. You've heard stories over the course of the convention so far about the way she picks up on people's moods or concerns. She is a great cook and invites her girlfriends over for dinner. She did that as a senator. Now she does that as vice president. She invites all the women senators, both parties, over to the vice president's home. And there's always one of her recipes featured on the menu. But she's somebody who understands the importance of our democracy, the importance of it working for everybody, things like lowering costs, protecting individual freedoms, protecting our democracy, but also knows what it's like to try to balance family and work and get everything done in any given day. And so she's a really wonderful friend, a mentor to a lot of people, and she's going to be a great president.
And from what you said there, is this a policy election or a personality election, do you think?
Oh, look, I think we need to make sure that we have the people of strongest character and integrity in the job of President of the United States. It's obviously the job, the person who leads the free world and leads our country and understands that, as we talked about this morning, Americans aren't ruled by kings. We're not going back to that. We're ruled by presidents who believe in the rule of law, believe in democracy, and in this case, also bring people together to hear their concerns and make sure that the economy works for everybody, that people's individual rights are protected, that we make sure that everyone's voices are heard so we can develop the best policies. They go hand in hand, and the contrast here could not be more clear.
When we come back, you'll hear from New Hampshire's youngest ever Democratic convention delegate.